suffering trying to convert the other one.
Oh dear. At least I'm the last of the day, so my computer can be just fine downloading. So yeah, I am a K-5 STEM teacher, and it's been a different world being a specials teacher this year. I've been in the classroom 12 years. And so then all of a sudden to have 6 different classes in one day and switch, my worst switch is when I go from 4th grade to 2nd grade, which isn't horrible, but my other school, so I switched between 2 schools. My other school is in grade level order. I go 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, kindergarten, but my other building, I'm going back and forth. And sometimes I just like, before the 2nd graders come in, I'm like, okay, I have to remember they're 2nd graders. Like we're jumping 2 years behind, because it's just, you know, like you have to change your instruction and you have to change how you give directions. And it's kind of a crazy switch. So that world has been challenging this year, which is good. I needed a challenge. But I would love for you to drop in the chat what you teach, because for me, a lot of people ask like, how did you get this job? I think maybe a little bit of jealousy, and that's okay. But of like, how did you get this fun? Like you get to teach robots and like just building and creating things all day long. Like they see it as like, I get to play all day long with the kids. And so I think they're just like kind of a little jealous of that. And I started by integrating in my classroom. So I see a lot of us are kindergarten teachers, 3rd grade, 1st grade, 5th grade, library, which is awesome because that's a great place that I know like in Olathe, they don't have STEM teachers. And so a lot of times it's the librarian that is bringing that into the school, which is awesome. And so I want to kind of focus our conversation on what does STEM look like in the gen ed classroom, and like, how can we integrate it? How can we, make it meaningful in the classroom, and really not make STEM meaningful, make reading and writing and math and science and social studies meaningful by incorporating and integrating STEM into it. So that's kind of my goal. I am not going to do a super formal presentation. I love to present, and so I have a million presentations. But I really, being the EdCamp model, like really want to have more conversation. I'm happy to answer like any questions that you have, and share some of my insight and things that I've either figured out in the classroom or even as a STEM teacher. But I think the biggest thing that I want to impress upon anybody who is thinking about STEM or is already doing STEM is a lot of people get caught up in the acronym of STEM, STEAM, STREAM. I mean, like there's every version of it. People get all defensive about, well, you know, art should be included. And I think the R is reading should be included. And I don't think it's worth getting caught up in that, because in my mind, STEM is more of a mindset. It's not about integrating science, technology, engineering, math. It's about creating like those real world, like the science, technology, engineering, and math is like the real world application of everything they're learning in school, especially in our world, moving into the 21st century, or we're in the 21st century. Our world is so much different to where those things are really an integral part of every day, and just helping kids bring reading and math to life. So instead of like wasting time arguing about acronyms, like to me, let's focus on why is the mindset so important, and what does that mindset look like, and how can we make it happen in our classroom is more important than debating, because art is a part of it. Reading is a part of it. Like all of that is, it should be all connected. I know a few years ago in Olathe, we got real gung-ho about breaking down the silos. Let's not teach reading in isolation, and science in isolation, and social studies in isolation. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Like we have got to show kids this is the real world. Like all of these skills are important because they help you function in life. It's not that you're going to be an expert reader for the rest of your life. Like we don't grow up and become like, I'm going to be a reader for life. Well, you are going to be a reader for life, but that's not going to be like your career. And so just helping kids see, why do we read? How does being a reader make you a good citizen? And how does it help you do well in your job and even with your family? And it can be a time you spend time with your children and learn about history. And so there's just so much more to it that I don't think our kids really understand a lot of times. They just think I'm learning reading because school tells me I need to read. And so that's kind of just where I wanted to start. My other question, I guess, for you that you could drop in the chat is like, where are we at on comfortability with STEM? Like, are we like a group of like, we are already integrating STEM, or are we like a group of, I'm kind of like, I know it's like a popular thing and I'm trying to figure out what I should be doing in my classroom, or if I should be doing something in my classroom. So if you don't mind just dropping in chat, like, I'm like 100% confident already doing it, or maybe like, I just hear a lot of people talk about STEM and I feel like I should probably figure this out. All right. Awesome. Okay, so I would say like the majority of us, I mean, like out of the people that answered here, is we're kind of on like the like earlier stages of kind of starting with STEM. So one of my favorite books, because a lot of us are gen ed teachers and then we have some librarians in here. My favorite book is J.C. Maslick, and I don't know, I'm gonna I'll copy her name in there. But she is on Twitter too. My favorite book is Remaking Literacy. So J.C. Maslick has tons of books on STEM. And most of her stuff is on integration. So it's not about like having a STEM program. And that's one thing that I've really struggled with this year as a STEM teacher, is it feels so isolated. Like I have the kids for 55 minutes and I'm like trying to instill a STEM mindset in 55 minutes every other week with a group of kids. And so I've been really trying to work with the teachers and integrating it in their classroom. And now I just like the Remaking Literacy book. I actually just gave it to a colleague for her to read, because she was really wanting to use STEM in her classroom, but she kept telling me, I don't have time, Ariel. Like I can't carve out an hour of STEM time. Like that's why they go to you. But I want to do STEM and I know teachers do it in their classroom. So how do I make it happen? And J.C. Maslick talks a lot about connecting it to literacy and I mean, building character development, understanding problem and solution, making inferences. Like you can tie so many reading skills into when students are making things. One of my favorite things to do is to read a picture book about 3/4 of the way through, where you get to like the climax of the story and there's this huge problem and you're about to read how the problem gets solved, right? And you stop the book and you have the kids problem solve. How should this character solve the problem? And it's awesome because, you know, they're thinking already, most kids, if they're really engaged in the story, they're already starting to make predictions about what they think is going to happen, right? So it's natural for us to start thinking about, oh, I bet the character is going to do this. Instead, freezing the book and saying, all right, what would you do if you were in this situation? It allows them to really engage in the story. And the kids that weren't listening to the story now have an opportunity to discuss with those that were listening and talk about the story. So not only are we just like making stuff with straws and pipe cleaners, but we're engaging in the story. We'll remember the character lives in the city. So we need to think about, I mean, they're starting to think about the setting and the character and all of these things as they're problem solving for this character. And if they don't, if they get off track and they're totally, you know, I mean, kids' imaginations can get really wild, which is great. And I love that. But sometimes I bring them back and I'm like, where's your evidence for the story in that? Like that character lives here. So is that going to work in the city? And then they're like, oh, like, I didn't really think about that. And so it gets you deeper into the story than you would have if you had just read the story aloud and been done with it. And the other thing with her that she talks about, but is the materials. So I know Natasha was talking about writing a grant. One of the things that people a lot of times get hung up on is, well, I don't have a lot of cool robots, right? When we think of STEM, robots pop in our head, right? And we start thinking about, I got to write a grant to get my program started. And robots are great. Let me tell you, I mean, the kids love robots. I could show you a video of, I just videoed kindergartners one day of them squealing the first time we got B-bots out. They were like, ah! Like the whole class. It was hilarious. But it doesn't require that. And in fact, it doesn't require anything. So I, in my classroom, had written a grant and gotten like, I had all these drawers, those IKEA like colorful drawers. And I had pipe cleaners and popsicle sticks and recycled just junk in the drawers. And that's what my kids did at indoor recess most of the time. And we would use it for activities like this as well. But there were times that, you know, you don't have time to get all that stuff out, and you don't, I mean, you can't always be getting hands-on and stuff. And so sometimes it would just be like on a seesaw, and I would have them come with 4 solutions. What are 4 solutions to solve this character's problem? And they're still getting to use their imagination. They're still thinking problem and solution. They're still thinking about design. So there's still all those aspects of STEM that they're having to think about, but maybe it's in a quicker form. So you just kind of have to gauge on your time that you have, but it doesn't have to be big and fancy. And I think that's the one of the things that people get caught up on. So that would be one advice, is just, you know, sometimes it doesn't actually have to be a physical product. Another example for the older kids, and the younger ones could do this too, but we were doing a project-based learning unit, and my students each had a region of the United States, and we were preparing for a zombie apocalypse, because natural disasters are so overrated. By the time they get to me, they've talked about it for years and years and years. And while we study that, then we kind of apply it to, okay, well, let's say the natural disaster is a zombie apocalypse. You know, what resources do you have in your region? What, bring in the engineering, what structure are you going to build to keep your people safe? How are you going to communicate to people? So kind of getting into public services, how do you communicate and let people know where the zombies are? And so they had all these things they had to do. Well, when we were talking about like communicating with people, one of my groups was like, well, I would like take posters and like put them up on like signs and trees and stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay. So during a zombie apocalypse, you're going to walk around and put up posters with tape on a tree and stuff. That sounds really safe. And they were like, well, I guess not. And I'm like, and people are going to be out and about and they're going to see your signs. And they were like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, how do you communicate with your friends? And they were like, well, like on my phone or like through video games and that kind of thing, you know, social media kind of stuff. And I was like, so use what you use. You don't communicate with people with posters. Like we're like pretty past that. I mean, now when you have a lost dog, you get on Facebook, right? You post like, hey, my dog's lost, or hey, I found this dog. Here's a picture. Very rarely do you see the cardboard sign sitting on the corner of the street. And so they were like, well, what if we had an app? And I was like, awesome. And they're like, but we don't know how to code. And I was like, it's fine. So what they did is they drew out the face of the app, and then they designed the buttons. And this is just paper and pencil. Design what the buttons would do. They had to have what the buttons would, how they would function. And then they would draw the next screen. So like when you click on this, it's going to go to this screen. And one of the things that they wanted to do is like, they were like, we could integrate Google Maps. And then like you could pull up the Google map and it would show you like live alerts of like where the zombies were. That sounds amazing. That sounds good. So that it got them thinking about that. They did not need to code. They needed to create the design. They needed to solve the problem. And then when they did that, I was like, then, you know, you just hire somebody to code it. Like, you don't need to code it. You got the idea and you hire a software engineer and you pay them to do it. And they were like, oh, okay. Like learning about different jobs that people have. But I, you know, like simplifying things, I think is really important when we think about STEM. So just not going crazy with it, and not feeling like you have to have this big budget or these big fancy things to make that STEM mindset kind of a part of your classroom. Even using current events, somebody had posted on Twitter the other day, the Suez Canal, right? Like the boat was stuck or whatever. I didn't really pay a lot of attention, but somebody had said, what if you set up kind of like a model and then you let the students brainstorm, how would you solve this problem? Like, what is your solution? What do you think would work to get this boat out of the Suez Canal? It's stuck. What are we going to do? Like, it's costing millions and millions of dollars, you know, having these products held up. So that, you know, looking at current events that are happening around you, there's tons with like green energy and different things. Sometimes there's things locally that are, you know, debates, like waterways. A lot of times are big debates, highways, different streets, whether we put a stoplight into something, you know, how do we gather data for that? How do we figure out how to solve that problem? All of those things are really good ways to connect it as well. And a lot of times people locally will connect with you and talk to your kids about some of the issues, especially like watershed issues. If you talk to your, I don't know what the water people are called, but if you get connected with them, like a lot of times they want to educate the community. And so they're happy to talk to your students about the problems that are in your community and letting the kids try to problem solve about, you know, different things that are happening. A lot of times they're really creative and us adults are very boxed in. So it's very possible that they could come up with a really good solution, or even just a solution that kind of sparks an idea that's like, oh, we hadn't thought about that yet. But really just the process of them going through that problem solving is really important. I see some of you notice fairy tales. That is definitely where we started with kindergarten and first grade this year. And a lot of that is empathy building. So when you talk about SEL, I mean, STEM is an amazing way to tie in SEL. We've done a lot of creating for others because kids naturally want to create for themselves. Like our little people, they're just selfish by nature. The minute they come out of that womb, all they think about is themselves. And so we have to start teaching them to think about others. And so designing for others. And we usually start with like kind of a survey or a set of questions that they interview somebody and then they design for that person. So a simple one is like designing a lunchbox for someone. And so you interview, what do you like? What colors do you like? You know, what do you usually eat for lunch? Is it something cold? Is it something hot? And then you start getting these lunchbox designs that are like, it's also a microwave and it's battery operated and they like to eat soup. So their microwave, they push the start button and it heats up their soup and they just open it up and it's ready to go. I mean, like kids are really creative. And so if you allow them the opportunity to create for someone else, they get this sense of pride because then when that person's like, oh my gosh, I love soup and now it's going to be warm. And I don't have to ask. I mean, I go to a school and they have a microwave, which I think is ridiculous, but they'll like microwave kids' food. And so like, now I don't have to do that. And so I just think those opportunities are really good as well as allowing them to have that empathy piece. Another good resource too is Vivify Stem. I kind of talked or heard them present last summer. They have a few free things on their website, but they, two, I believe, astrophysicists, or one of them was an astrophysicist, and maybe one was something different. They were like on NASA level, somewhere up there, engineers, and they just saw a need for education. They're women, and they were like, you know, I just feel like the space education kind of has dropped off. But even STEM as a whole, there needs to be more education there. And so they started creating lessons and training teachers. And so I got to hear them present, and we did a lot of their lessons this year. We did their Mars challenges, and they had like a couple boat challenges that we did for our ORL students. I think the ORL, there's a set of ORL, I keep saying ORL, sorry, remote learning. We called it optional remote learning. So that's why I'm saying ORL. But our remote learners, they actually had remote learning lessons that we used. So they have a teaching video, and then they had some things like activities for the kids to do that they could do at home. So if you are remote still, or if you just want to look into those lessons maybe for the future, it's kind of nice to watch teachers that are, or I mean, they're not even teachers, but someone teach STEM really well. So even if you just want to watch them and be like, how do they talk to kids? How do they get them started on a challenge? They have quite a few YouTube videos where they're just teaching kids. So that's kind of cool too, to watch people that are really good at it. But one of the things they are big on, and one thing that has been a big focus for me in my position this year is careers. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of students that I've talked to, and even my sister, that they get to the end of end of high school, and they have no idea what they want to do. Like they're like, I don't know. You're going to go to college? I don't know. Do you know what you want to do for a job? I don't know. I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what I like to do. I don't know what I'm passionate about. And I think exposing them, there's so many different careers now that like, I don't think were even available when I was a kid. I've had students ask me why I didn't just become an engineer since I love engineering so much. And I was like, honestly, I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, I thought old white dudes were the only engineers in the world. That was the world I grew up in. So I think we need to expose them to the variety of different engineers and types of jobs that are out there, to let them know that they should be exploring and trying to figure out what it is they like, and giving opportunities to make and create and problem solve, so that they can start exploring what they want to be when they grow up. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Giving them the ability to ask questions because they don't even know what to ask. They don't, I mean, yeah, until they know that something exists, but it just like enough of a spark is awesome. I had a fourth grader tell me the other day, he's like, hey, Mrs. Jankard, I decided I'm going to MIT next year. When I grow up, I'm gonna go to MIT for college. And I was like, that's awesome. And I knew he was working on coding a video game. So I was like, okay. I said, so you're gonna design video games? Is that what you're gonna do? And he's like, well, I haven't decided yet. He's like, I am enjoying coding video games, but I just really like coding and I really understand it. And so I haven't, nailed it down, but I know I want to go to MIT. This is a 9-year-old. Like he now has purpose for the next, what is that, for 8 years of school. Like hopefully that keeps him driven to the point that he understands that school is important and he's got to get through this, because if he wants to get that goal of going to MIT, he needs to be, staying focused and getting through his course so he can get to that. So that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome having the mayor get connected. That's awesome, Helen. It's amazing. So what are some things that you like to do? I'm just like blabbering. I could probably talk for like 8 hours on this like subject, but it looks like you guys have some great ideas in the chat too. If somebody wants to unmute and jump in, go for it.
We used to, and I'm hoping it kind of comes back next year. I think part of the reason it stopped was COVID, but we used to have like Fun Fridays, they used to call it. Before I was there, they didn't have art, so it was like an art focused type thing. And then when I started at my school, they had art, and so it became STEM focused. And so we would do like some type of STEM project once a month to kind of just like enjoy with the students and have them like try their thinking. There was no, this is a grade for you type thing. And so just kind of getting them interested that way.
We are actually, when the Mars rover was happening a couple months ago, one of our standards in science is about non-living and living things. And so we actually did some solar panel activities, and we made a solar oven. And so then we had s'mores made into it, and that was really fun. And they had a budget, and then they had to go to the store to get all their supplies that was needed. And one of the students, we had 3 different groups. And so one of the students had a cardboard box that was really, really thick. And so he did very well. The other ones didn't have as thick of cardboard box for their material. So it's kind of interesting for them to do all those parts to it.
So Fallon, I really struggle with the reflection as well, mainly because of time for me, because I have them for 55 minutes. But even in the classroom, a lot of times, that's the difficult part. I think I would say if reflection is hard, and I don't mean to make this sound bad, like it's not a bad thing, but I think it means that maybe the STEM lesson itself wasn't enriching enough. And what I mean by that is any STEM project, by the end of it, it should be leaving students with like a thirst for more and like wanting to know more, or maybe they failed and they want to try it at home. And so sometimes the reflection just becomes natural. It inspires them to go beyond or inspires a new project. Which has happened a few times where we kind of had our long range plan. And then at the end of that, we were talking about it, reflecting, and maybe it was like a huge failure. And the kids are like, well, maybe we should do this or we should try that. And it's like, oh my gosh, we've got our next like activity. This is what we're going to do next time. Or they want to extend it beyond that. They want to change something and try something. Well, what if we had had this material available or something? And so sometimes the reflection, if it just kind of ends with, well, that was fun. That went really well. Everybody succeeded. For me, it's that moment of like, okay, that was not a good design challenge. That did not leave them thirsting or asking more questions or pushing them to the next activity. That I probably need to rethink that lesson. So that would be my two thoughts on that. We always have a reflection piece of like, did you succeed? Did you fail? And then we talk about like, if you failed, what would you want to do differently next time? And we talk about like, would it be a difference in materials? Would it have been different if you had more time? Was there something you needed to understand more? Like, I didn't know something, I don't know. We made wind-powered cars a few weeks ago with kindergarten, first grade. And one of the reflections was, we can't take our mask off to blow on our car to make it go. And I didn't really trust little kindergartners with fans either. So they had made like fans, but like part of the reflection was they didn't know how to fan a fan. And I know that sounds really silly, but kindergartners like couldn't like fan their car. And so they were even talking about, well, if we had had a fan or if we could have tested it with something different, then maybe our cars would have worked better. Or maybe the type of fan determines the type of sail that we created for our wind powered car. So just kind of a lot of times creates an extension of the activity. Yeah. Or yeah, extending it home. That's awesome. I've had kids too that they failed in class with the STEM activity and they went home and redid it, like recreated it. And they came back and they were like, by the way, I got it to work at home. Like, I mean, it was kind of cool that they like wanted to go home and figure it out. So that's definitely, even if you sent home like, hey, this is what we did today, see if you can try it at home. A lot of the kids, and we do a lot with Legos. So a lot of the kids will be like, well, I have Legos at home. I'm going to try this at home. And it's like, awesome. That's great. We did zip lines with first graders, and it was with a little red hen. And we talked about how she had to get the flower like up the hill and it was too heavy for her to carry. And so we talked about some different things that sure, I guess we're going down the hill. And so they created a zip line. And I had a student, so we did this back like October, I think, with kindergarten, first grade. And I had a fourth grader just tell me a couple weeks ago, he goes, that zip line is still in our house. And my dad asked the other day, when can we take the zip line down? It's like a cup and string. And apparently she puts her Barbies down it like daily. And so I guess dad is a little annoyed that there's this jankety little zip line that goes down in their house. But, you know, that's that natural kind of carry on of the activity. She's testing different things at home. She's seeing that like, wow, I can do this from my banister all the way downstairs. And I just think that's really cool. So like I said, I think that's when you know, like you nailed it with that lesson. And when you get to the reflection part, if it's short and quick and like, well, that was fun, then I think it's just a good reflection point for me of like, okay, that didn't really stimulate much beyond this activity. And then Fallon asked about a good STEM idea with weather for kindergarten. And I was trying to think, but if anybody else has something. No, that was something else. Even like recreating like an umbrella, like if you posed like, let's look at the umbrella. How does it work? Why do we have umbrellas? What would make an umbrella better? So a lot of things we do is innovation. So my kids know the difference between invention and innovation. Invention is when you create something brand new, and innovation is when you make something better. So even if you look at the umbrella, bring one in, open it, and talk about, have you ever seen like an umbrella like flip backwards, you know, on a windy day? So how could we recreate the umbrella so it works on a windy and rainy day? And even getting them to look at some different umbrellas, because now we have like the ones that kind of come down a little bit, and maybe it's not an umbrella, maybe it is a totally different invention. Maybe the umbrella is just a horrible idea and we got to scrap it and start from scratch. So a lot of times taking something that already has an invention to solve something, you can use it to reinvent or rethink and make it better. Kids really like that too, by the way. Anytime you can innovate off of something that exists, they eat that up.
We've done like paper towers where it was like who can make the tallest and strongest like paper tower. And I mean, this is at the 5th grade level, so I feel like you could probably modify it for kindergartners, but it was like we would just use like a like stand fan, I don't know what that's called, just like a floor fan, and turn that on to like different powers to see like what strength could you get it to before it tipped over. So that was
Nice.
another way.
That's a good twist on that paper tower thing. Instead of just going for the tallest, I like it. And paper towers, building a chair for Baby Bear. We built a chair that could hold Goldilocks, I guess was the goal, because obviously when Goldilocks sat on it, she broke it. And so we were building a chair for Goldilocks, I guess is what we were really doing. And they just stacked blocks on it. But you know, with little kids, you have to do a lot of mini lessons and it's very good for fine motor skills. So with all the iPads and technology, our little ones do not have fine motor skills anymore. So we learn how to like tear tape. Like we use masking tape. We don't use glue in my class because glue takes too long to dry. So everything's masking tape. You would be amazed if you walked in and saw these kindergartners with masking tape, because at the beginning of the year, they were like, it was all over them. And they're like, I need scissors to cut it. I can't, now they're like, they can just tie it, tear it up in little pieces and they can use it. But that was one of the lessons. So we learned how to roll paper and how to make like columns. And we talked about how much stronger it makes the paper when we make columns. And we talked about folding paper and how that makes paper thicker. So at the younger grades, you do have to kind of do some mini lessons just on how to manipulate materials. But then as they get older, they can do even more stuff. I've actually seen, Nick, that they've done like paper towers, a chair that your teacher can sit in, and it's like can be done. It's actually pretty cool. I haven't done it yet, but I think that would be a fun activity. I mean, anytime you're like testing it out, I feel like they're all about it too. I think the other thing is like the vocabulary piece. Like vocabulary is a great time in STEM because they get to see it in action. And I'm not just talking about like science vocabulary. Like there is so much vocabulary that we get to talk about. Even talking about folding paper, when kids use like the word thick and different things to manipulate the paper that they're not used to using, and they can see and they can feel it. Talking about columns, we're making columns here. And I know for like older grades, those don't sound great. So I was trying to think of something that we've done recently. But it's an amazing time to bring that in. We've been doing robots lately, our robots have like a marker holder in the center. We use the Finch bots. And so with second and third grade, they're doing shapes right now. And so knowing your shapes is like a huge thing, and the attributes, right? So they can a lot of times rattle off the attributes like, well, square has 4 sides and it has 4 right angles and they're equal sides. But when they have to code their robot to make that shape, they are choosing the distance of each side. They are choosing the angles, like they have to enter the angles. And so it was kind of like a different experience, like that application of some of their learning, which was cool. And then my fourth challenge was if they could draw a hexagon, which got us into reflex angles, which most of you probably know is not a second or third grade standard. But for those students that got that far, I mean, I was there, we drew a straight line off the edge of the hexagon. And I was like, what's the angle of a straight angle? Or, what's the degrees? And they were like, so we talked about a circle, it's 360. A snowboarder goes around in a 360. So, what would half of that be? 180. Okay. So if the inside angle of the hexagon is, I think it's 120. It's 120. Then what's the reflex angle? Because that's actually how we have to code the robot, is we code the reflex angle. I mean, like the language and vocabulary that you use to code these robots, using that math vocabulary allows for that extra exposure to using it and applying that vocabulary and language as well. So what are some of your, those of you that have done things, what are some of your other favorite things that you have done STEM in your classroom? Do you have any other good ideas?
One year when we were doing STEM challenges school-wide, in the fall, they had the kids create a corn maze. So they had a design what the maze would look like. And then we used our Code and Go robot mice. And then they actually had to successfully go through the corn maze. And it was really cool. Then they actually had to build the corn. So, and we had little grids for them, and they used toilet paper rolls and things like that to actually create the corn. And it was really kind of fun.
Yeah, that's fun. Mazes are always fun. Yeah, Ozobots. I've actually never used the Ozobots.
They're actually really cool. They are not only computer screen based, but you can also they can read color codes. So I had some of the younger students just use different colored markers on white pieces of paper, and the different codes would have them do different things. So if you did, for example, like red, blue, red, it would run over it and then spin around or zigzag or turn around and go the other way. And, like you said, with the kindergartners going, as soon as it do what they wanted it to do, they're like, I did it. It was really cute.
That's awesome. I am a huge advocate for the computer science and robot stuff.
I'm sorry.
You're fine.
What was the question? I heard my name.
What type of robots were they?
They're called either Ozobots or Ozobots. It's Ozobots. We actually acquired like 10 of them through a Donors Choose program, and we got them right from Amazon. They're fairly inexpensive.
I was gonna say I use the Ozobots also. If you do their little online, or they have they advertise classes, and a lot of times you can win like a free teacher, just like one to get. But I use them a lot with stories, and then like doing the climax of the story. And with kindergarten, we read Over the River and Through the Woods, and they had to kind of illustrate the different parts of the story, and then they got to put the robot on it, and so those were fun.
Yeah, and with any robots, the order, like sequencing stories, I mean, that's a lot of computer science anyways, is teaching kids how to sequence, and that robots can only follow like the sequence that you give them. So a lot of retelling stories. So we did that a lot of with like the hungry caterpillar, all the different foods that the caterpillar eats, and we put it on a mat, and then our bee bots would go in order of the story. So yeah, lots of sequencing activities with books is a good way to tie that in as well. That's a great idea. Lori, I am almost sure that I've heard somebody talk about some kind of game like that with the red cells and the white blood cells. And there's actually on the, this was pre-COVID. I think it's still on there, but I mentioned that zombie apocalypse thing earlier. This is not probably very STEM related, but on that topic of like how viruses spread, there was it's actually kind of more of a reading thing, but you know, those logic puzzles, like you guys are probably like my age or older. Like, so you probably remember doing logic puzzles. I did them all the time where you have like the graph and you have like the two things and you're like Xing and trying to figure out who had what or whatever. And so like one side is like the people and one side is where they contracted the virus. Or you're trying to figure out which ride was spreading the virus. And so you read through the story and it gives you clues like Susie and her dad rode on the Ferris wheel and neither one of them got it. And so you're kind of reading all these things about their day at the carnival or whatever. And you're trying to figure out one of those logic puzzles and filling in the X's. My students had never done those. I mean, as a teacher, I don't think I'd ever done those with my students. So it was their first experience of that, but it's actually on the CDC website. So if you go to CDC website and go to zombie preparedness, I believe is what it's called. They actually have a couple resources and there's even a video, like a fake video of like a newscaster. And he's like, we have a zombie apocalypse breakout, blah, blah, blah. And then like the screen goes out and then you're supposed to give them like the reading article. So that's kind of another activity to kind of pair with any other virus related.
We still use those logic puzzles. Like I've used them almost every year. One of my teammates like had a whole book of it. And so we would just use it if like we needed something to like fill the time, especially when it was like state testing. And we're like, we know you guys have been doing this for a while, like have this as a break.
That's awesome. I loved them as a kid.
Yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like
they're
kids
super,
now,
they
like,
always get super into it. Once they
yeah,
understand how to do it, like the first few you kind of have to like walk through with them so they understand it. And then they're like, okay, we want another one. Like, where's the next one?
yeah. I did learn, we did a practice one because I was a little worried about that. The one on the CDC website's good because there's actually like some reading involved. So, I mean, I would say it's probably third grade and up because they actually have to do, I mean, there's like a bunch of non-essential information, you know, like in any word problem. And so you're kind of reading the story, but then they kind of have to go back and really look at the details. So it's a great reading activity as well, for sure. They're not really like escape rooms, I would say. So I put the link in there. If you go to, oh, and the zombie preparedness graphic novel is pretty legit too. I think it's under zombie preparedness for educators. Yeah, there's the video and then there's a bunch of like different things. There's a scavenger hunt. What would you pack? Disease detectives is the logic puzzle one. Yeah, the 2-minute mysteries is kind of like that, where you're kind of like digging into all the details and trying to figure it out. Kind of on the computer science coding kind of aspect, what are things that you guys have used for that? Like, do you use Scratch? Have you used code.org? Have you heard of Google CS First?
I tried to do something like the learning to code stuff through Khan Academy. They've got a like thing. So that was like when my kids were virtual, it was like one of their Friday things. So I think they learned like how to make a snowman and do some other things, and like their end result, they got to choose from like 3 different projects.
That's awesome. I actually haven't used the Khan Academy, but I've heard of some kids getting into it. I like Apple Swift. I haven't used that. We don't have iPads with the older kids at my school, so Yeah, we used a little bit of the free Code Monkey stuff and the Tinker free stuff. If you are like looking for an after school program, or maybe you don't really know any coding, Google CS First is like, to me, hands down the best way to get your kids into, what do I want to say? Like creative coding. Code.org is a great place to start and kids to understand how block coding works. But it is very scripted and it is very like step by step and introducing concepts. And a lot of my kids get bored with it. It does have like open-ended stuff built in, like you can go to open-ended and it's kind of like Scratch. But my students absolutely love Scratch. I've never had a kid get bored with Scratch. So if you're like, I just don't understand it, I wouldn't know how to use it or how to help them, Google CS First is like a video-based curriculum basically, and it's free. So it walks them step by step. And I mean like how to log in. Like it starts with, this is how you log in and put your username in. And you need to have 2 tabs open. You need to have this tab and you need to have your Scratch tab open and you're going to go back and forth. Like it is very good. And it really encourages them to be creative. Whereas a lot of this stuff like Codable and Code Monkey and Tinker and Code, I mean, like kids like that stuff, but it's very gamey and it's very like kind of just learning. You're learning steps. Whereas I feel like Scratch kind of opens the door of like, you're in the driver's seat. Like you're figuring this out and you're going to trial and error and kind of fail, or you can watch this video to kind of help you. And they can make more meaningful things. You can tie Makey Makey in. I don't know if anybody's used Makey Makey, but it works with Scratch. And so we made like interactive Kansas history museum exhibits one year. I told them museums don't typically anymore. I mean, if you're a good museum, it's interactive now. You can flip through things, you can touch things, you can watch videos, it's interactive. So their museum exhibit had to be interactive. And so I had a lot of kids do Makey Makey, and when you touched different parts of their like display that they created, a video would play. So they had coded it to where like when you press the cow, the video is going to tell you about the agriculture during this time. If you touch the house, it's going to play a different video. So that's kind of how they built in that interactive piece. So and Makey Makeys are like $50 a piece. So that's a pretty cheap. It does require a computer though, because it has to plug in through USB, but it's all free software from there on. And then 3D designing is another thing. So like a lot of people, when they write grants, they think I need a 3D printer. Kids love 3D printers, they do. But even just getting started with Tinkercad, it's a free program for 3D printing, 3D designing. It doesn't have to be things that they can print. I was gonna see if I could pull up. So like the first activity that my students did, they did houses. And I told them, I said, we're not printing your house. This is about 3D design. And they designed houses and put it together. And some kids are very good at conceptually like picturing and visualizing that house, and other kids really struggle. So it's a good activity to have kids do. The youngest that I've had get on Tinkercad is 2nd grade, and I would say it's a little bit of a stretch at 2nd grade, but some of them can do it if they have enough perseverance to keep with it. But definitely by 3rd grade, and they have some tutorials and kind of things that can walk students through and get them started, so you're not having to do everything from the teaching standpoint. I'm logged into my wrong account, but I was really impressed with some of those creations. And that's another way, like problem solving wise, designing things in Tinkercad. So again, not necessarily to print, but sometimes they can't make it look like they want it to look like with materials. So Tinkercad kind of gives them that ability to design things. I was gonna try to see if I could find, I was so impressed with some of their houses. Like really loading slow. I'm sure it's because.
You have access to, like, do your kids have desktops when they use Tinkercad, or do you do it on iPads?
So my school's 2nd through 5th grade is Chromebooks.
Oh, okay.
So they do it on there, and they have touch screens. So sometimes they'll use their stylus for things. But I would say it's much easier on a desktop, but Tinkercad does work on an iPad. It's just a little more touchy. Like it's really sensitive on the iPad. But I prefer on a desktop. Any other questions? I feel like I talked at you a lot. Hopefully that wasn't. Because one of the things that kind of frustrates me in the STEM world is things with the 3D printer of like kids just going down to like Thingiverse and downloading things, and like I got to print something, but like until they get in there and design and realize how difficult it is and how challenging it is to think in 3D, because a lot of times they'll stay in one view and they'll put all these pieces together. And then I'm like, spin your thing around, and they spin around and the pieces are like here and they're all floating. And they're like, what? This is 3D. Like you have to look all around the thing. And so they really learn how, I mean, those are state standards, like understanding 3D shapes, even in 1st grade, I think is when it starts, where it's like putting 3D shapes together to create one shape. You know, looking at chairs, a lot of times we'll model things that we can see. Okay, look at this chair. Look all around it, touch it, feel it. What's the size? Different shapes. There's cylinders. There's, you know, a rectangular prism. Now build it in Tinkercad so that they see those shapes and they kind of get how do those shapes come together to create something. So I think that's really important too, like as you're getting into those things. They want the quick, right? They're quick gratification. I want to find something. I had a kid download this super cool like octopus, and it had all these connecting things. And he's like, hey, can I print this? And I was like, did you design that? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, no, you didn't. Like, I was trying not to crush him, but I'm like, I'm not printing that. Like, we already talked about this. Like, we are printing things that we've designed. And my other thing is they have to have a purpose. So a lot of them, their quick purposes, it's a keychain. Because I always say, well, could it be a keychain? I just don't want that. I mean, like, we already have a plastic issue in our world, right? So we don't need to print a bunch of plastic little trinkets that are probably going to get thrown in the trash by the time they get home. So I'm always trying to encourage them for purpose. Like, you know, is it a pencil topper? I've had kids design pencil toppers. I've had kids design jewelry, like a ring that they could wear. And then we get into measuring, and they're like, well, how big is that? I'm like, well, the grid is by millimeters. Here's a centimeter ruler. How big is your finger? Like, how are we going to measure this? So you get into conversions and you get in some different math concepts in designing those things. But I always ask them, what's your purpose? Like, we're not just printing things. If you have a purpose, if you're going to wear it or you're going to put it on something, a lot of them, our big thing now is phone holders. I wish I had one with me. They've been designing phone holders. So one is a dinosaur, and they actually found it on Thingiverse, and then I made them design their own. So the tail holds the phone. So you set your phone on it, and then it holds it. And then we took they actually showed it to the principal, and she was like, that's really cool, but I don't like dinosaurs. Like, I don't want a dinosaur sitting on my desk. So cool phone holder. And they were like, well, what would you like? Like, what do you like? And she's like, well, I like K-State. And they were like, okay. And then they were like, we don't know what to do. And so I was like, okay, let's talk about this. You know, we talked about the mascot is the power cat, the wild cat. So we were looking at all the different mascots. And then we looked at the letters and we saw, oh, if we wrote KSU and we took the K and just like kind of made it a curly cursive letter, that could be our phone holder portion. And so they designed it for her. They freehand drew the KSU. We printed it out, and then the principal actually bought it from them because they're starting their businesses and stuff. But it, like, she took it to like an admin meeting, and then like the assistant superintendent wanted one, and this other teacher wanted one, and a different principal wanted one. And so they were super excited that not only had they designed something functional, but other people wanted it too. And so that kind of became a really cool thing. But again, that kind of gets in that SEL that I mentioned earlier, like designing for other people too. They found so much joy in designing something necessary for someone else too. So that was kind of cool. Oh, the time it takes to print things. I don't have an answer for that. It takes forever. I mean, I have hit print before I left, and that's dangerous just because a lot of times it can get messed up. I had to replace a nozzle because I did that one time. I still do it because I'm just desperate to get them printed. In a not COVID year, I've actually heard of the school that I'm at, I guess in the past, had a mom that came up and she knew how to run it. And she would just like, the teacher would tell her, these are the things I need print. And the mom's job was just to like keep on it and like hit print and like keep up with the jobs. The other thing is you can put multiple things on the, I mean, if they're all the same color, you can import multiple objects on one plane. And so sometimes I'll do that. Like I'll take 4 kids' projects, and if I can fit them all on there, I'll print them all at once, because if I printed one by itself, it might be 3 hours. But if I print 4 different things, it ends up being more than 3 hours, but it's not 3 times 4. It ends up being like 5 hours. So that's another thing. Like if you can fit multiple projects on the plane, that's another way to get multiple printed at a time, but it's hard. It's not easy. I feel like I spend half of my life changing out colors and messing around with the 3D printer. Well, awesome. If you guys need anything, I know Natasha was asking about grant stuff. Like I've written multiple grants. I've worked with Dash robots, Finch robots, Sphero robots, B-bots. So like if you're looking into the materials and you have money, or you're looking to write a grant and you want advice, I'd be happy to help based on grade level or what your outcome is, or what you're wanting to happen, how many kids you have, when you're going to use it, all those things. Like I'm happy to help with any of that. I've been through it many times. So I've even sent like grants that I've written to people so they can kind of see what we requested and how we requested it. So just reach out to me anytime and I'd be happy to help with any of that too.
And then just a quick reminder, if you haven't, to click the attendance link at the top of the grid, just so we can get that information as well.